Nixon, Donald Trump is not prepared to listen to those urgings and that advice. Kevin McCarthy, who is as strong an ally as he has had in Republican leadership over the past 4 years, bluntly told the president before his trip to Texas, before his public appearance yesterday, that he needed to get out there, that he needed to call Joe Biden, that he needed to come to terms with the fact that he lost the election. The election is over, and he lost. And McCarthy warned him that if he doesn't come out and take these steps and also plea for calm, that he would face a choice of certain impeachment and quite probable conviction in the Senate or resignation. That was the advice that he got from an ally, and obviously the president did not do that. Yesterday he came out and he said that he did nothing wrong, that his speech before that Capitol riot was entirely appropriate, that everybody knows that. And he certainly has not called Joe Biden. He hasn't come out and come to terms with his loss in the election. So I just don't know. I mean, all the Republican leaders there are could go down to the Capitol, go down to the White House and tell him to resign, and no indication he would listen to that.
Well, that is the open question right now. Cecilia Vega, let me bring this to you as well, because we've seen resignations from the president's cabinet. We've seen resignations from top White House officials. We even know that his White House counsel, who is still talking to him at this point, has said he will not serve as the president's counsel during an impeachment trial.
And the counsel that he does have, his private lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, could be facing disbarment. At least there is a move to see that effort underway in New York. There is no question right now that Donald Trump is a man on an island by himself. In addition to all of those resignations at the top level of his administration and in his circle that you just mentioned, let's not forget he has been muzzled. His one vehicle that he uses to communicate with his supporters, his primary vehicle, Twitter, he is no longer allowed to use that. And now today, in addition to all of that, we are seeing so much of corporate America start to back away from support of President Trump and his party. As John just said, I guess perhaps one of the more astounding things that we're seeing right now, it in some ways is not yet surprising, is that Donald Trump, facing all of this, a pariah in his party in many ways, is showing zero contrition. And not, George, that he's only showing zero contrition. He is now still blaming, he is threatening Joe Biden and the Democrats, saying this could come back to haunt him. Be careful what you wish for. So if you're looking for any kind of contrition from President Trump, we certainly haven't seen it up to this point. I don't think we're going to see it going forward.
Okay, Cecilia Vega, thanks very much. Of course, it comes in the backdrop of those events of last week where arrests are still being made by the FBI, a nationwide investigation. I want to bring in Pierre Thomas, our Chief Justice Correspondent, for more on that. Every day that goes by, a new arrest, more horrifying details.
You're absolutely right, George. And we heard words from the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia yesterday, sedition and conspiracy, that is part of the investigation. They're looking at the very real prospect that some of the people planned this well in advance. They came with communication devices, they came with weapons, the bombs we learned yesterday had timers, a level of sophistication that we did not know. So this situation is incredibly dangerous. And George, as I drove in this morning, just before 6 o'clock, the barriers extending from the White House, layers upon layers of security now in place, several blocks away from the White House. You cannot drive near it. Law enforcement officials saying they are going to create a scenario where people cannot move quickly in the city. And also you now have the National Guard, some of them armed. George, I got intelligence yesterday that was briefed to the House that the concern is that more than 10,000 Trump supporters could be coming toward the city, many of them armed. That is the concern, and that's why there's so much preparation, George.
And Pierre, they're also looking backwards at the fact that there were FBI reports warning of possible action last week, yet they don't seem to have been acted on in anything close to an adequate manner.
That information where there was discussion of war and that people needed to die to get their president that they wanted into the job. Officials said yesterday that information was provided to local law enforcement officials here in Washington. And George, all the information now according to my sources, is pointing to what did the Capitol Police leadership, and I emphasize the word leadership, what did they do with that information? Why did they not have adequate perimeter defense around that building to give support to their own people? Everyone I'm talking to, they say that inside that building, the Capitol Police fought valiantly. Overwhelmingly, you did have some doing things like taking selfie, but that was very much the minority. The issue is, did those rank and file police officers get the support they needed? And the answer is a resounding no so far.
Pierre Thomas, thanks very much. Let's bring in our Chief Global Affairs anchor, Martha Raddatz, as well. Martha, of course, that means the preparations, as Pierre said, for the inauguration next week for these impeachment proceedings right now on the highest of alert at this point. Also, the United States military concerned about possible threats, vulnerabilities to our national security in these final days of President Trump. And as you were reporting this morning on Good Morning America, delivering an extraordinary warning to members of the military.
Absolutely, George. The senior military leadership, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, including the chairman, reminding all service members that they took an oath to the Constitution saying the rights of freedom of speech do not give anyone the right to resort to violence, sedition, and insurrection. Really extraordinary that they had to remind them of that, but there is a reason for that, and that is because they saw several former military members in that crowd during the siege. Some have already been arrested. These are officers, enlisted personnel. They want to send out a reminder to the military. And the military in the past and currently, and it's something they've been addressing, has had a problem with white supremacy. The Pentagon will say there's no room for that. They will investigate anyone who took part in that siege. But they are also preparing for the coming days. They know that there may be protests and violence already starting, people planning things, as Pierre said, and those calls to wage war. As you know, the National Guard, couple hundred, 340, I believe was the number last Wednesday when I was standing there, but they weren't at the Capitol till hours later, until the National Guard, all of them were called up. I think people forget also that they're civilians, so they were called from their homes. So it was actually a pretty quick response once they were called in to tamp down the siege. But before that, the mayor of D.C. had called for soft caps. She didn't want them to be dressed in tactical gear. She didn't want them to look like the military as they did during the riots over George Floyd last summer. But what happened is the Guard was not there at the Capitol. The Guard was doing traffic control instead of at the Capitol, as others had suggested they be.
Okay, Martha, thank you. I want to bring in Terry Moran as well. So, Terry, we learned that members of the military may have been involved in part. Individual members of the military may have been involved. Individual police may have been involved. There are allegations that Republican members of Congress may have been escorting some of the protesters, rioters, through the Capitol, and of course the encouragement and complicity of the president himself. It is so hard to wrap your head around the idea that this happened here with this kind of participation.
George, I think you're exactly right, and I think that's one of the things we're seeing is gradually our political leaders and each of us as citizens coming to terms with something we haven't seen since the Civil War. We've got the prosecutors talking about seditious conspiracy. They wanted to overthrow the government. We're hearing about the generals, the leaders of our military, talking about insurrection, because that's what it was. And as the evidence comes out, and there's evidence that they were, or there was much more organization in that mob than it looked like. There were commandos essentially who were trying to direct it. They may have had schematics of the Capitol. There's a member of Congress who says she believes some of her colleagues were taking tours of some of these people who ended up in the protest as reconnaissance missions. Now, there's no proof of that, but that's kind of where we are. And then there's the president, as you say, who encouraged and incited. And the evidence is yet to come about what nature of involvement he might have had. He certainly did nothing. He did not lift a finger to stop it, perhaps thinking he could benefit from it. And that is where we are.
And that is why we're here today for the second impeachment. The House is back in session right now. They're reading the rule which will set the terms of the debate for the day. Let's listen in.
Or demand for division of the question, except 2 hours of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary or their respective designees. Section 2. Until completion of proceedings enabled by the first section of this resolution, A, the chair may decline to entertain any intervening motion, resolution, question, or notice, and B, the chair may decline to entertain the question of consideration. 3, upon adoption of this House Resolution 24, A, House Resolution 40 is hereby adopted, and B, no other resolution incidental to impeachment relating to House Resolution 24 shall be privileged during the remainder of the 117th Congress. Section 4. Section 5 of House Resolution 8, agreed to January 4th, 2021, is amended by striking January 28th, each place that it appears, and inserting February 11th.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 1 hour. Mr. Speaker, for the purposes of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Oklahoma.
This is Chairman of the House Rules Committee, Jim McGovern from Massachusetts.
During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purposes of debate only. I ask unanimous consent that all members be given 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, today the Rules Committee, yesterday the Rules Committee met and reported a closed rule, House Resolution 41, providing for consideration of HRES 24, impeaching Donald John Trump, President of the United States, for high crimes and misdemeanors. The rule provides 2 hours of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking member of the Committee on the Judiciary. The rule also provides that upon adoption of HRES 24, HRES 40 is hereby adopted. Finally, the rule extends recess instructions, suspension authority, and same-day authority through February 11th, 2021. Mr. Speaker, we are debating this historic measure at an actual crime scene, and we wouldn't be here if it weren't for the President of the United States. On Wednesday, January 6th, Congress gathered here to fulfill our constitutional duty, tallying the Electoral College victory of President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris after a free and fair election. This is largely a ceremonial role for the Congress, one that sends a message to the world that democracy in the United States persists. But at a rally just a mile and a half down Pennsylvania Avenue, Donald Trump and his allies were stoking the anger of a violent mob. A member of this very body proclaimed on that stage, "Today is the day American patriots start taking down names and kicking ass." Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, called for trial by combat. Then Donald Trump told the crowd, "We're going to have to fight much harder. You will never take back our country with weakness." Even though, according to his own administration, that this election was the most secure in our history, Donald Trump repeated his big lie, that this election was an egregious assault on democracy. Vice President Pence, he said, was going to have to come through for us. Trump then told this mob to walk down to the Capitol. The signal was unmistakable. These thugs should stage a coup so Donald Trump can hang on to power. The people's will be damned. This beacon of democracy became the site of a vicious attack. Rioters chanted, "Hang Mike Pence," as a noose and gallows were built a stone's throw from the Capitol steps. Capitol police officers were beaten and sprayed with pepper spray. Attackers hunted down lawmakers to hold them hostage or worse. Staff barricaded doors. People sent text messages to their families to tell them they loved them. They thought they were saying goodbye, Mr. Speaker. This was not a protest. This was an insurrection. This was a well-organized attack on our country that was incited by Donald Trump. Domestic terrorists broke into the United States Capitol that day, and it's a miracle more people didn't die. As my colleagues and I were being evacuated to safety, I never, ever will forget what I saw when I looked into the eyes of those attackers right in the Speaker's lobby there. I saw evil, Mr. Speaker. Our country came under attack, not from a foreign nation, but from within. These were not protesters. These were not patriots. These were traitors. These were domestic terrorists, Mr. Speaker. And they were acting under the orders of Donald Trump. Now, some of my colleagues on the other side have suggested that we just move on from this horror. But to gloss over it would be an abdication of our duty. Others on the Republican side have talked about unity. But we can't have unity without truth and without accountability. And I'm not about to be lectured by people who just voted to overturn the results of a free and fair election. America was attacked, and we must respond, even when the cause of this violence resides at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Each of us took an oath last week. It wasn't to a party, and it wasn't to a person. We vowed to defend the Constitution. The actions of Donald Trump have called each of us to fulfill that oath today. I pray that we rise to this responsibility, because every moment Donald Trump is in the White House, our nation, our freedom is in danger. He must be held to account for the attack on our Capitol that he organized and he incited. I solemnly urge my colleagues to support this rule and the underlying article. The damage this building sustained can be repaired, Mr. Speaker. But if we don't hold Donald Trump accountable, the damage done to our nation could be irreversible. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Massachusetts reserved. Gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I begin my formal remarks, I want
the ranking
to ask for
Republican on the House
God's
Rules
blessing
Committee.
and protection on you, for my friend Mr. McGovern, for all who come to this chamber today to speak and to vote, for our wonderful staff that makes this possible, and most especially for the men and women of the Capitol Police and the other affiliated law enforcement agencies that are here to protect everybody and to make sure that this proceeding can go forward. With that, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the gentleman from Massachusetts, my very good friend, distinguished chairman of the Rules Committee, Mr. McGovern, for yielding me the customary 30 minutes, and I yield myself such time as I may consume. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, today is a sad day for all of us. For me personally, for the Rules Committee, for the entire House of Representatives, and most certainly for the American people. For the second time in 13 months, we're meeting to discuss the impeachment of the President of the United States. Our meeting today does not arise in a vacuum and comes at what I hope and pray is the end of a tumultuous period for our country. Less than 1 week ago, Congress met to certify the results of the 2020 presidential election. What started out as peaceful protest turned into a riot as an untold number of individuals stormed the Capitol building. 6 people died as a result of this mob. And it's only by the grace of God and the brave acts of the U.S. Capitol Police, the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police, the FBI, the ATF, and other responding agencies that there was not more bloodshed. Violent acts such as these have no place in our republic. These shocking and sobering events rest high on our minds today, as well they should. Certainly January 6, 2021 will live in my memory as the darkest day during my time of service as a member of this House. After these grave events, we as a nation and as an institution have an opportunity to come together. President Trump has conceded the 2020 election. Congress has certified the results of the election. And next Wednesday, President-elect Biden will be sworn in as the President of the United States. Congress and the nation can move forward knowing that the political process was completed as designed and the constitutional framework that has governed our republic since 1789 held firm. But instead of moving forward as a unifying force, the majority in the House is choosing to divide us further. With only a week to go in his term, the majority is asking us to consider a resolution impeaching President Trump. And they do so knowing full well that even if the House passes this resolution, the Senate will not be able to begin considering these charges until after President Trump's term ends. Mr. Speaker, I can think of no action the House can take that's more likely to further divide the American people than the action we are contemplating today. Emotions are clearly running high, and political divisions have never been more apparent in my lifetime. We desperately need to seek a path forward, healing for the American people. So it's unfortunate that a path to support healing is not the path the majority's chosen today. Instead, the House is moving forward erratically with a truncated process that does not comport with the modern practice and that will give members no time to contemplate the serious course of action before us. In every modern impeachment inquiry, an investigation and committee action has preceded bringing an impeachment resolution to the floor. In part, this is to ensure that members have the full facts, the opportunity to engage expert witnesses, and have a chance to be heard. It also provides due process to the President of the United States. And again, in every modern impeachment inquiry, the President has been given an opportunity to be heard in some form or another. This is necessary in order to ensure that the American people have confidence in the procedures the House is following. It's also necessary not because of the President's inappropriate and reckless words are deserving of defense, but because the presidency itself demands due process in the impeachment proceedings. Unfortunately, the majority's chosen to race to the floor with a new article of impeachment, foregoing any investigation, any committee process, or any chance for members to fully contemplate this course of action before proceeding. Professor Jonathan Turley is correct when he called this a, quote, dangerous snap impeachment, an impeachment that effectively would go to a vote without the deliberation or inquiries of the traditional hearing. Professor Turley also noted that, quote, the damage caused by the rioters this week was enormous. However, it will pale in comparison to the damage from a new precedent of a snap impeachment, unquote. If the majority is seeking consensus, this is hardly the way to create it. The majority is failing to provide the House with an opportunity to review all the facts, which are still coming to light, to discuss all the evidence, to listen to scholars, to examine the witnesses, and to consider precedents. This is not the type of robust process we have followed for every modern impeachment, and the failure to do so does a great disservice to this institution and to this country. Mr. Speaker, I can think of nothing that will cause further division more than the path the majority is now taking. Rather than looking ahead to a new administration, the majority is again seeking to settle scores against the old one. Rather than seeking to heal America, they're seeking to divide us more deeply. And rather than following the appropriate processes the House has used in every modern impeachment, the majority is rushing to the floor, tripping all over themselves in their rush to impeach the president a second time. What's worse, though the majority seems to believe that this course of action is self-evident, and that's simply not the case. I have to tell them it's not. Members that have reviewed the same conduct and have come to dramatically different conclusions. Legal scholars like Professor Turley and Professor Alan Dershowitz, both of whom condemned the president's statements, believe that his statements are not impeachable. I know other scholars have different points of view. Given this difference of opinion, shouldn't we have a better process than this? Shouldn't we have a chance to examine witnesses, discuss the matter with legal scholars, and consider this in committee? On a matter as grave and consequential as impeachment, shouldn't we follow the same process we have used in every modern impeachment rather than rushing to the floor? On behalf of generations of Americans to come, we need to think more clearly about the consequences of our actions today. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, there is no reason to rush forward like this, other than the very obvious fact that there are only 7 days left until a new president takes office. But what's worse, as Professor Dershowitz has pointed out, because of the Senate's rules, the case cannot come to trial in the Senate until 1 p.m. on January the 20th, 1 hour after President Trump leaves office. This is an ill-advised course, in my opinion, Mr. Speaker. Even Senator Joe Manchin, a Democrat, agrees. Senator Manchin is quoted this week as having said, quote, I think this is so ill-advised for Joe Biden to be coming in, trying to heal the country, trying to be the president of all the people when we're going to be so divided and fighting again. Let the judicial system do its job, unquote. So what then is the point of the rush to impeach? We are coming off a horrific event that resulted in 6 deaths. We have an opportunity to move forward, but we cannot if the majority insists on bringing the country through the trauma of another impeachment. It will carry forward into the next president's term, ensuring that he will struggle to organize his administration. What's worse, it will continue to generate the bitterness so many of us have opposed. Why put us through that when we can't actually resolve this before the end of the president's term? Mr. Speaker, I think my colleagues in the majority need to think about this more soberly. We need to recognize we are following a flawed process. We need to recognize that people of goodwill can differ. We need to recognize that while the House may be done with this matter after today's vote, it will not be done for the country. It will not be done for the Senate, and it will not be done for the incoming Biden administration. The House's action today will only extend the division longer than necessary. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I would note that there are other remedies that can be pursued. The President is expected to face litigation over his role in last Wednesday's events. There will be criminal proceedings against the perpetrators, and I hope all of those who stormed the Capitol will be brought to justice. And some members have proposed an alternative procedure, censoring the President, which could garner significant bipartisan support in the House. I do not think impeachment is a wise course, Mr. Speaker. I would urge my friends in the majority to reconsider. There's still time to choose a different path, one that leads to reconciliation and hope for better and brighter days. With that, I urge opposition to the rule, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Oklahoma, reserved.
Opening arguments there on the rules to set the terms for this debate today on the impeachment of President Trump. You saw two senior members of the House, Democrat and Republican. The differences are stark right here. You heard the Democrat Jim McGovern say this is a crime scene. We are reporting from a crime scene that was created by the President of the United States, saying that there is no way that the Congress can move forward without moving to impeach President Trump. You heard the argument there from Tom Cole, the senior Republican. No personal defense of the President, calling this a sad day for all of us, even calling last week's events the darkest days of his term in Congress, but saying that the President needs due process. He can't get that with a rush, what he called a snap impeachment. And then a strong political defense right there, saying that if the Democrats move forward, it would divide the country. Dan Abrams, I want to bring in our legal team. Let me start with you right there. It was striking there, no personal defense of the President, almost entirely a procedural argument there from the House Republicans.
Right, and that's very different than what we heard in the first impeachment proceeding, where there was almost this outrage that this was even happening. Questions about pure politics. Here you have a recognition that something bad happened, that there will be accountability, but this isn't the right venue, is basically the argument there. Now, that may end up being a sort of successful argument in the Senate when it comes to conviction. But with regard to the American public, it's nowhere near as persuasive as suggesting that this is all a fraud. This never should have been brought. This never should have happened. There's nothing there. That's not what they're saying here. What they're saying is that this isn't the right way to do it. And that's a very different type of argument.
And Kate Shaw, thank you, Dan. There are going to be questions of whether you can actually try the President after he leaves office.
That's absolutely right. You know, those questions have been raised in an op-ed this morning by former appeals court judge Mike Luddig, and others have too. You know, there's no clear-cut constitutional answer to the question of whether you can try a president in the Senate after the end of the president's term, because we've never tried to do it. But there is historical precedent for a post-departure trial of other federal officials, and there's actually substantial evidence around the drafting of the Constitution that the founders were very familiar with post-departure or post-government service impeachment and trials. So, you know, I think there are arguments in both directions. For what it's worth, I think the arguments are stronger that it is permissible. And one additional issue is, would a court ever even decide if President Trump were to face trial after January 20th and seek to challenge that in the Supreme Court? The Supreme Court has said that impeachment really is in the control of Congress. It's not for the court to decide what permissible impeachment procedures look like. So I'm very skeptical that the Supreme Court would even resolve this question at all. So to be honest, if the Senate wants to try him after January 20th, I think it fully has the constitutional power to do that.
Kate Shaw, thanks. David Muir, it's pretty clear the Republican argument would be he's leaving anyway, let's not pile on.
Yeah, we heard the dividing line already in this debate about the rules, that this is going to be a dangerous snap impeachment. As you pointed out, Representative Cole said this is only going to divide the country further in these final days of President Trump's time in office. But we heard from the Democrats, and we knew this from the select few who wrote this article of impeachment while still hunkered down in the Capitol. They they stayed to President Trump's own words with the hope that this would bring some Republicans into this argument with them. And we heard it this morning from Congressman McGovern saying, you will never be able to take back our country with weakness. Vice President Pence is going to have to do the right thing. They draw the connection to moments later, hearing rioters chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," the text messages to families, those who thought they weren't going to survive this insurrection at the Capitol. He said these were not protesters, these were domestic terrorists acting on the orders of Donald Trump, and that's what we're going to hear this afternoon.
And Lindsey Davis, I guess the question will be how many Republicans stay unified behind this argument of due process of dividing the country?
Right. I mean, the partisan division was still clear, as evident as it's ever been, really. It seems like you have kind of on one side, this is about healing. On the other, it's about accountability. On one side, this was about a protest. On the other side, this was about insurrection. And while so many of us have those images seared now in our minds of the breaching of the Capitol and the breaking of the glass, you know, it was really a nice moment to hear from the congressman, really personalizing it as far as those text messages of "I love you" to the family members. And at this point, you know, whatever happens, it will be historic, the outcome. And the idea that's especially profound that this is all playing out, that this debate is taking place, as it was stated today, at the scene of the crime.
And the possibility that there could be an impeachment trial just an hour after Joe Biden is inaugurated President of the United States next week. I want to go back to Rachel Scott on Capitol Hill. Rachel, give us an idea of how this day is going to go now. They're now debating the rule, but that will be followed by the actual debate on the impeachment resolution.
Yeah, that's exactly right, George. So you have this initial debate, and then you're going to have these procedural votes. And then right around lunchtime, we are going to see them start to debate the actual article of impeachment. We expect that to last for about 2 hours, and then that will be followed by the actual vote. And as we know, if this is successful, President Trump will be impeached for a second time. Big questions here on just how soon that article of impeachment will get over to the Senate. We know Democrats are signaling that they're looking to fast track this. And George, I just have to say, I just walked through the halls of Congress. I saw National Guard taking naps here, right in the halls of Congress. There is a massive law enforcement presence here on the scene, something that we just didn't see a week ago, George.
They cannot get caught flat-footed again. Rachel Scott, thanks very much. So our coverage of the Rules Committee proceedings, the Rules hearing, is going to continue on ABC News Live right now. Here on the network, we're going to go back to our regular programmings, but we'll be coming back on when they actually begin to debate the impeachment resolution itself. As Rachel said, that is likely to be around lunchtime. We'll be back for that. Have a good morning.
This has been a special report from
And that was ABC News with a special report with the House of Representatives there debating the impeachment rules. Really hearing from both parties, and it was a very stark difference. You hear Democrats saying that basically they're debating at a crime scene and that the president has to be held accountable for this, and then top Republicans there in that Rules Committee saying that this is not the way to do it, that the president deserves due process, that this is a snap impeachment. So we are really seeing the arguments that both sides are making here.
Yes, and you heard that there are 5 Republicans that have said that they could vote in favor of impeachment, but you also heard from ABC reporting that it